I'm Mark, and this is the Mr. Productivity Podcast, the podcast to help solopreneurs banish overwhelm, reduce stress, and get more done. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking with Jeffrey Shaw, who is often described as an authority and advocate for self-employed business owners, valued for his actionable and in-the-trenches approach to achieving business and life success. Selling eggs door-to-door at age 14 years old led to a lifetime of self-employment. In his 20s, he built a portrait photography business and became one of the most sought-after portrait photographers for affluent families in the United States for more than 3 decades. His portraits have been on the Oprah Show and CBS News, featured in People and O magazine, and hang at Harvard University. Today, Jeffrey is the author of Lingo and The Self-Employed Life, host of the Self-Employed Life podcast, and founder of the Self-Employed Business Institute. His TEDx talk is featured on TED.com. He's a LinkedIn learning instructor, contributor to Entrepreneur magazine, and speaks at association events, entrepreneurial groups, and conferences. Now, before we dive into today's show, I want to invite you to sign up for the free 21-day productivity challenge. As a solopreneur, you've got a lot to do, and this challenge will help you be more productive at it. Invest 1 minute a day in reading one tip that will transform your productivity habits in less than 1 month. To sign up for free, head on over to my website, mrproductivity.com/challenge. Remember, Mr. is all spelled out, M-I-S-T-E-R. mrproductivity.com/challenge, or you can click the link in the show notes. Now, on with the show. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark, I'm glad to be here with you.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I'll tell you why. Because my target audience, my love is for solopreneurs, because I am a solopreneur. And when your team reached out to me and says, you are the guy to go to for self-employed people, I'm like, wow, this would make a fascinating conversation, because by definition, solopreneurs are self-employed, correct?
100%. Absolutely. Yep.
Now, you started, I read this in your introduction, but I want to go back to it. You started selling eggs door to door at age 14. When I read that, I'm like, eggs? How do you sell eggs door to door? And what happens if you broke any eggs? Did it come out of your pocket?
Well, I'll tell you what, it turns out it was really the best beginnings of entrepreneurship one could have, because there were so many learning lessons in it. For one, it was the bravest thing I could imagine doing, because at that point in my life, I was incredibly shy, like paralyzing shyness. So lesson number one for me, which I think holds true for me today and so many business owners, is that the benefits were greater than the fear. I mean, I was scared daylights to be going knocking on doors. But the benefits were great, and the benefits were not really the money. It was, hey, at 14 years old, I was charging $1.25 a dozen eggs, which by today's standards is really cheap, but normally that would be really high, especially in 1978. But the benefits were how I was growing. And that's what I saw. And that's still to this belief what I think is the best part about being self-employed, is it's like personal development on steroids. So what I loved about the experience, despite the fear, was how I saw myself grow, how I saw myself stretching out of my comfort zone, how I learned valuable business lessons. And I'll share one with you, Mark, because this is my favorite lesson from selling these eggs. I don't remember if any of them broke, and I think I just took great care that none of them broke. But here's something I did figure out. So the deal was, I lived in the country. I didn't grow the eggs. I didn't have the chickens, but a local farm did. So I struck a deal with a local farmer to go on Thursdays, and he would supply the cardboard cartons, and I would sit there and pick all these eggs and fill up the cartons and then sell them over the weekend. Knowing your target audience, right? I would sell them on Saturdays because everybody needs eggs for breakfast on Sunday morning. My mother also owned a beauty parlor in town, so I would pack up cartons of eggs for her to sell at her beauty parlor on Saturdays. But here's the thing I realized one time. I mean, these are farm fresh, not organic, but you could say free range before it was even fashionable. I realized that I used to clean off the eggs really carefully to get rid of all the chicken poop. And then one day I decided to experiment. I said, what if I left a little bit of the chicken poop on there to show that they were authentic? And I loved watching my customers open the eggs and just wince a little bit because there was just the right amount of chicken poop left on the eggs. But it told them they were farm fresh. And they would say things like, well, I guess they're fresh. Right. And I realized a really valuable lesson of that, like the authenticity of it not being perfect made it feel more authentic.
I love that lesson. Thank you for sharing that. And when you're talking about the eggs, we have a friend of ours who has a farm, ironically, and their roosters, I think hens. Hens lay eggs, Mark. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so we get our eggs from her. And what's interesting is all the eggs are not uniform. I was telling my wife the other day, I cook the eggs in an Instant Pot. And I'm like, can't these hens get together and create an equal size egg? Yeah. But they're all different because they're all different hens.
Even different colors.
A medium egg and a large egg. It's kind of hysterical.
Yep, exactly. It's a great lesson in like I said, how imperfection actually lends to more authenticity. You and I are talking about as podcast hosts, how, neither of us clean our show up perfectly clean because you want it to also feel authentic. Great business lesson for sure.
Now, you were a portrait photographer, and I was a portrait photographer and a wedding photographer for about 6 months. Here's what happened.
Okay, I was going to say, I didn't know that about you.
Yes. So here's what happened. So I was fired from my corporate job in July 2005. And I said, hey, I've always wanted to be a wedding and portrait photographer. I think I'd try. Now, this is the film day, audience. If you're not old enough to remember, there was a time we had film that wasn't like digital photography. And so I launched my career. Now it bombed, totally bombed. I did 2 weddings. That was too many. And, the sweet bride that comes to you months before, that's not the same person on her wedding day. I found it out the hard way. And it didn't work out. The only thing that came out of that is, remember, we're talking 2005. Facebook was brand new. Twitter was brand new. And when you marketed, you either did direct mail or email. But a friend of mine in Bible study class was a professional speaker. And I went up to her and I said, hey, I was thinking about promoting my business by being a professional speaker. What I was going to do to boost up my photography business is I was going to go to like groups around the Houston area where I live and get clients that way, teach them how to take better pictures of their kids and whatnot. And that failure of my portrait and wedding photography business actually launched my career of a podcaster, a trainer, a speaker. It's just amazing how that little piece of pearl came out of that failure. So I always tell people, just because you fail at something, take a moment, look back. What can I glean? What lessons can I learn from my failure? Because I promise you, every failure has a seed of success. I think some guy by Napoleon Hill said something like that.
Yeah. Well, I love the lesson you got in that. And again, I think your solopreneur audience will love all these valuable business lessons you and I are percolating on. And similarly, so here's my lesson on doing wedding photography, which I also I did for about 2 years. And to your point, it was 2 years too many. Most stressful thing, I lost a week of sleep before every wedding, and I realized it just was not for me. But here's the thing. Here was the biggest business lesson I took away from it is I was actually really good at it. And when people heard I was no longer going to be photographing weddings, they were devastated. People are like, but you're really good at this, not just the photographs, but I just had a way of handling people that day, making it a really pleasant experience with them. I was really personable. I mean, there was a real warmth to my interaction with the bridal party. So people were shocked, and it looked like I was having a great time, and I was good at it, but I didn't like doing it. And that to me was a very early on business lesson. I was in my early 20s. I was 20 years old when I started out as a professional portrait photographer, and for the first 2 years. So by 22, I was giving up weddings. But I learned real early on, even if you're good at something, even if it's income deriving, if you don't love doing it, don't do it. And this happened to be something I was, for whatever reason, good at, but I didn't enjoy it. So I removed it from my business model right away and focused in on what I really loved to do, which was on location family portraits. I never photographed in a studio. I like the diversity of the different locations. I knew that my camera, by photographing on location, my camera was going to bring me to really fabulous homes and glamorous locations because I needed to find great locations. And that's why I was able to love it for 40 years. But dropped weddings, despite its profit, despite being good at it, I didn't love doing it.
Last Monday, Gary Vaynerchuk, who I really appreciate what he teaches us, he posted something on LinkedIn. He said, would you rather make $300,000 a year, hate what you do, hate Mondays and are stressed, or make $75,000 a year, love Mondays and are happy. And of course, I chimed in and I said, option B, I'd rather make less money and be happy, because I still believe today that money is just a magnifier of who you are. I don't think money is going to make you happy. I think you need to be doing, and you already talked about this on the show, you have to do what you love to do. And like, you didn't like doing weddings, but you like the portrait angle. Would you agree with that? Would you rather make less money and be happy, or make more money and be miserable?
100%. And we see this all over. First of all, I love when it's the major shifts in employment. I happen to speak a fair amount in the HR industry and have done a fair amount of research on this. Today's workforce, your millennials and generations thereafter, they will take a 30% paycheck cut. They will take a 30% pay cut to do something they love to do and that they feel the company they work for is aligned with their values. All right. So this is just ingrained in future generations, which I love so much. But I would absolutely, to me, it's the core lesson of being self-employed, because it's not the easy road. And, most of my clients and students of my Self-Employed Business Institute, most have left corporate to become self-employed and realize it's harder than they thought it would be. But you know what? I don't know that I've ever met a self-employed person, when asked, that didn't say that they wouldn't have it any other way. Despite the challenges, despite the ups and downs, despite the disappointments and everything else we face, I don't think I've ever met a self-employed person that once they got a taste of that freedom and that empowering feeling, I've never met anyone that would say I would go back. Everyone says, yeah, I wouldn't have it. And despite all that, I wouldn't have it any other way. I would absolutely work whatever I can get, but I'd rather be happy. That happiness is the number one priority to me.
Now, don't get me wrong. I would like to make $300,000 a year and be happy and love Monday. So don't miss.
And that's an option for everyone.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about freedom, and one of the things that drives people crazy, and when I say people, I mean friends of mine who are in the corporate world, as a solopreneur, I have a lot of freedom they don't understand. So I'm a huge English soccer fan. We call it soccer in the U.S., football in the rest of the world. I love it. So when my team is on in the middle of the day, I'm watching the game live. It's only 2 hours, but people don't understand. How can you do that? Well, I work before the game and I work after the game. Right. And that's how I structure it. Now, what I explained to them, I said, yeah, you like that part of it, but if I'm not working, I'm not getting paid. Unless I have a course or a membership or something like that, where you go to work, whether you have a really productive day or you have a meh day or a really crappy day at work, you still get a paycheck. If I don't serve my clients well, they fire me. And so everything, I don't care if you're in the corporate world, you're self-employed, you're a solopreneur, entrepreneur, everything's got pros and cons. So it's not all, what's that saying, rainbows and Skittles or whatever it is when you're a solopreneur. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You have to understand that there's good sides and bad sides. I believe that as a solopreneur, and maybe you agree with a small business employed or self-employed business person, you are basically unemployed. Like every day you wake up, you're unemployed. You have to go and get more work. You're not going to a job with a guaranteed salary. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And that's also the most satisfying part of it. I mean, because I started selling eggs at such an early age, I've never had a traditional job. I've never received a paycheck. So this is all I've ever known. And yeah, pros and cons. And believe me, many times through over those 40 years, I had this fantasy that the grass is greener on the other side and maybe I should get a traditional job, to which at some point my son said to me, Dad, you're completely unemployable. And he's not wrong. I would be a horrible employee.
Now, how old was he when he told you that?
Oh, in his teens. I mean, he's now 30, but it was a fair number of years ago.
That's hysterical.
Yeah. So he's always been a wise kid. And I mean, wise as in wisdom and attitude, perhaps. But yeah. So, I mean, to me, it's not for everybody. And I want to make that clear. Self-employment is not for everybody, but I don't know. What I like most about it, even beyond the freedom, is, and freedom, if you ask most people, and I've done plenty of surveys, and you ask people why they became self-employed or why they would dream of becoming self-employed, everyone has some variation of the same thing. It's either freedom, control my future, control my destiny. But honestly, for me, it's even different than that. And maybe this is true for everybody, but for me, being self-employed enables me to create the life of my dreams, and which changes. I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I'm from New York, but I decided to move to Miami 7 or 8 years ago and went down, tested it, and said, yeah, I would like to live here. So I can just change everything. And at that time, I was still doing a fair amount of photography, even 7, 8 years ago. So, but it's just hopping on a plane and fly back up north. I recently moved from Miami to Jacksonville, Florida, because I've lived in high rises for 20 years. And I decided I wanted an antique house with a garden.
Oh, wow.
So what I love about it is you can instantaneously change your life. Now it depends if your work is remote or not, but let's face it, many of us are doing remote work nowadays. And I just love the fact that I can continuously leverage my profession, my business to steer my life. Like I just decide, I want my life to go in this direction. So I can drag my career along with it instead of what feels to me what most people encounter is that all their life decisions are based on their job. If their job wants them to move, they have to move whether they like the location or not. Where I just really like being able to steer my life and use my business to steer it in that direction. When
we went through COVID and I kept working, I kept doing podcasts, I kept doing the training, the Zoom calls, and people would ask me, how are you adapting so well? I'm like, I've been remote since 2005.
Right.
So I didn't miss a beat. Now, the people who are used to going to an office, nothing wrong with that. They had to learn a new skill, but I think a lot of us who are already remote, like, yeah, okay, we'll just keep on rocking. Did you have the same thing?
100%. In fact, I mean, I actually found it kind of amusing because I had no idea. It was also, again, good lesson because I didn't realize how challenging that would be for other people and how challenging it was for people to not have the structure of when to be, where to be when and the typical meetings when it's been my life all along. I mean, again, even as a photographer, I photographed on location. So while for 22 years, I had a downtown Connecticut storefront, but that was kind of like a home base. But my work was all on location. So I just feel like I've always had a lot of flexibility. And as you were referring to earlier, when the industry went digital, I pivoted towards the digital direction much faster than most of the industry. And not just in the taking of the photographs, but I also very quickly realized that there was a way that I could adapt to the lifestyle of my clients by allowing them to view their proofs online instead of dragging themselves into my place of business. And most photographers were dead set against that because they felt they would lose control of the sale. To me, it's like, it wasn't about, if people feel like you're trying to control them and control their sale, they're going to resist that. To me, it was about adapting to my clients' lifestyles. And this was easier for them. And one of the things that was ironic to me when I realized the option presented itself, I thought, I'm a family photographer. Why do I want to take parents away from their kids in the evening to come in and choose the photographs of their family? When these are families, they're very affluent families. They're busy. They don't get enough time with their kids in the first place. They don't have enough chances to read a book to their kids at bedtime anyway. Why would I want to take that? That to me just started feeling really against my values as a portrait photographer. So I changed my business in a way that, hey, put your kids to bed. Let's meet at 9:00 online and I'll show your proofs to you, remotely. And it dramatically increased my business because how could they not love that?
Now, let's just take a break here because I got to ask you a couple questions about photography. I am amazed. I have the iPhone 13 Pro Max. I am stunned at the quality of pictures these cameras take. And you could have an Android. I think the Pixel has 3 cameras on it as well. I mean, are you impressed that the cameras that go in our pockets take such great pictures now?
100%. I mean, it's the only thing I bring on vacation. To be honest with you, I don't bring professional equipment with me because my whole personality changes and people run away from me, my kids, when I pull out my professional equipment. So the only way I'm going to enjoy my vacations and not be a nuisance to people around me is just to use my iPhone. So I'm amazed. I'm thrilled by it. And here's what I'd like to, and again, I know it feels threatening to photographers. One thing I've been saying in the photo industry for a lot of years, which is true in all our industries, is that you're not going to stop a moving train, right? I mean, look how well Sony did trying to stop Napster from streaming music. They may have stopped Napster temporarily, but everything is streamed now, right? So industries have to adapt. The musicians, Taylor Swift is on tour and killing it. Beyonce just set out. She's going to make billions of dollars projected because these are artists that can perform, right? Mm-hmm. If you are a studio artist, and you're only relying on sales of streams, you're not going to kill it like Beyonce and Taylor Swift, because these are artists that can also perform and fill up stadiums. So in a lot of ways, I think, people resist the change of technology in various industries, and we could all be affected at any time. But at some point, you just have to be realistic and say, you're not going to stop a moving train. What can you do to adapt to it? So I know plenty of photographers are threatened by digital. Plenty of industries are threatened by a lot of things. Restaurants were threatened by their restaurants being shut down. Look how many adapted to delivery and pickup and change their business model. Just be a realist. Look at the way the world is changing and say, how can I change with this? And probably create something better and more relevant for many years to come. And so, sure, they create beautiful images, but what I think the positive is about it is that it's made a more visual oriented world. Mm-hmm. The world is interested in looking at photographs. They're interested in looking at images. People are more comfortable.
Are you one of the million? Join over 1 million people, which may be a slight hyperbole, and get productivity tips that will help you live a more productive life. Head on over to mrproductivity.com/insider.
In front of cameras. Years ago, I used to have to get people comfortable in front of the cameras. Now I have to get them to stop the red carpet pose because they're too comfortable, right? But I think there's a positive to the fact that people are visually oriented and comfortable in front of a camera.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I take all my videos in 4K. I've got 256 gigs on the phone. Everything's backed up to the cloud. And when you go on trips, when you only have to pack your phone, your phone and your wallet. And if you're a woman, a phone and your phone goes in your purse. It's just so much convenient. I remember going to Disney World, 15, 20 years ago. And you have to go through security because I would carry the camera bag with my multiple lenses. You have to go through security. You have to go through security when you're going through, the bag security when you have just a phone, because everyone has a phone with them. And I just think technology is a blessing and a curse, and you get to choose what it is. Now, you can endlessly scroll on TikTok and Instagram and whatever, and that's a waste of time. Or you can use it, take great pictures, to communicate with people. You get to choose on that. So I thank you for giving us your thoughts on the iPhone photography. Let's go back to talking about self-employed. So what are some of the lessons that you learned and I know you started when you were age 14 with selling the eggs, then you became a photographer, but let's talk about the last 3-4 years. Any big lessons that you have learned since maybe before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic that you would like to share with the audience about lessons you learned that could help them?
I'll even if I may go a little broader instead, not just the last 3-4 years. And as I'm talking it out, I'm sure I'll probably think of some things in the last 3 or 4 years. But two things really stand out to me that I learned over the years and still very much applies today. And it's one of the core lessons I try to instill in my clients and in my students. One is the basis of my first book, which is called Lingo. All right. So
I actually read that book, by the way, long before I knew you. I actually read that book, but don't give me a test, okay? Because I probably would fail it.
Yeah. Well, the concept of lingo is to learn to speak your ideal customer's secret language, right? And people have a secret language. And the lesson comes from the fact that while I've said, I ended up being a photographer, family portrait photographer for very affluent families, I didn't come from affluent. I came from lower middle class at best in a small town upstate New York where you would sell eggs. But how did I become then the go-to photographer for affluent families in the US? Well, I did that because I took the time to understand their lingo. I understood clearly to me that I needed to work with an affluent clientele, not because I thought the roads were paved with gold. In fact, if you'd asked me when I was 20 years old what a lot of money was, I don't know that I could have defined it because I didn't come from money. So what was a lot of money? When your family brings in just enough money to cover the bills that month, what's a lot of money? I don't know. Maybe 100,000 would have seemed like millions to me at that time. So I didn't really have a reference point. I just knew that I needed to work with people who had discretionary income because I was struggling to get my business off the ground as a photographer, trying to serve people who didn't have discretionary income because it's a luxury item. So I realized I needed to find people who had discretionary income, who had the affordability to invest in photographs because it was important to them to have photographs as a memory and to hand down from generation to generation. So that to me meant affluent people. Well, how do you do that? Well, I took it upon myself to understand what made them tick. So I started studying the behavior of affluent people in high high-end stores in New York City. I would go to these high-end stores, high-end restaurants, and I would study the customers. I would study what got their attention. I would study the structure of the stores. I wasn't really interested in mimicking a brand, but I was interested in the psychology, the psychographic of affluent people, what made them tick, what triggered them emotionally, and then replicated that in my photography business. So that, as a principle, applies even more so today, that it's the old adage, or what's become an old adage, that people need to know, like, and trust you. It's not even enough today. In order for you to penetrate a market, people have to feel like you get them. And they have to really genuinely feel like you get them, get their lifestyle, get their values, and that there's an emotional connection. That will hold up, and always has. It's what made me stand out. It's what enabled me to create a business in a world that I didn't come from. And it's what will always work best in business. That's lesson number one. Number two,
before you go on
Sure.
to lesson number two, I got to share something with you. So I want to reveal something on the show I've never revealed before. One of my secret languages is 2 words: carrot cake. So if you were to call me and said, "Hey, Mark, I got the most delicious carrot cake for you. I'd like to send it to you for free," you're going to get my attention, okay? Because I love carrot cake, and I'm very picky. I'm a carrot cake connoisseur, Jeffrey. Okay, so there's a place in Houston. It's called the Taste of Texas, and they make the best carrot cake. I'm not kidding. If someone came to my door with a Taste of Texas carrot cake, you're probably going to get my attention for a few minutes longer than if you just knocked on my door unexpected. I'm just putting it out there so everybody knows that little thing about me. And on June 21st of this year, it'll be my 58th birthday. I will be at the Taste of Texas, and I will be having a piece of delicious, moist carrot cake. So I
love that. And I guarantee you, some listeners listening in, you're probably going to be sent some carrot cake, which is a good thing. Good play, my friend. But no, that's just it, right? It's really understanding. And for me, coming from lower middle class and suddenly being in these, and once I got the ball rolling and I was in these affluent homes, there's just there are these differences that just are like these subtle differences in the way what makes them tick, And I'll give you an example. One of the roles I played as their photographers, I would custom design holiday cards for them. And at the time, photographs would be mounted on the front of the card. Of course, they all went digitally eventually. But they all wanted custom cards. They wanted it unique. And of course, it had to look, Christmassy. I grew up in a world where, on your fireplace mantle or the staircase, we didn't even have stairs. I grew up in a 1-level house. But people in my world, if they had stairs, they would have pine boughs on your fireplace mantle, right? Well, affluent people don't use pine. That's gauche, right? What they use is boxwood.
Okay.
Boxwood's a whole other plant. Now imagine, so imagine I'm designing greeting cards that need to look Christmassy. It's knowing these things. Like if I put pine boughs on a Christmas card for an affluent family, that's not what's in their house. What's in their house is boughs and roping made of boxwood, which is a very small leaf, deep green evergreen plant. It's very refined. It's elegant. That's what's hanging on their mantles. That's what's hanging on their staircases. So it was seeing this so that I could replicate that. It was just so, it's just really paying attention to details. And like you said, if somebody reveals something intimate about them, it's about remembering it. That's speaking their language. So that was the first lesson. The other second lesson, somewhat related to this, but I think is really important for people in business to understand today, especially from somebody like myself who has been in business long enough to see this shift, is that people hire you today not because you're the best in your field, but they hire you today or buy from you because they feel good about who you are. It's more of an energetic decision than it's ever been. Because I can tell you, in the 80s and 90s, you stood out in business because you were considered the best in your field, whatever that means, and I was in the arts. So it's very subjective whether you're the best photographer. But my clients believed I was. I was known to be the best photographer for affluent families because I had a way of capturing their lifestyle without it being obnoxious. I had a way of photographing them in their homes in a way that the details told the story without it seeming like they were being too forward. So I was considered the best. And that's why I got hired in the 80s and 90s. Today, if you think about your own behavior, you're more apt to do business with somebody who you feel good about, who you feel is aligned with your values, who you feel is a good person and contributing to the world. You can be amazing at what you do, but if people don't like you, they won't work with you. And that we see that every day in brands. Think about how many brands suddenly become unpopular because something is revealed about that company or the behavior of the CEO or where that company puts their money. Suddenly they fall out of fashion with a lot of people or a segment of population because people only want to do business with people they feel aligned with today. And that's really important to understand in business so that you are being more authentic, so that you're being more transparent and revealing to who you are and what the values of your business are. These are really important things to move your business forward today.
I agree with you 100%. And I remember I was born in 1965 and about 1975, 77, I was really understanding how did you figure out what companies to go with? And back then there was no social media. So you either watch TV, and this hopefully some of my audience will get this. There was no VCRs, no DVRs, no satellite cable or any of that stuff. I mean, you had to watch a program live or you had to see a billboard or you get the mailers in your mailbox. That was it. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, you just can't say, hey, I'm Mr. Productivity. I have a coaching program. I have to have things like a podcast, a blog, an emailed newsletter, a presence on social media. So people get to go, kind of like this guy. I kind of like what Jeffrey's doing. And that's how we get people to get into our so-called funnels. You just can't, they're not just going to give you money anymore. That you need to prove your worth because there's so many options out there now. People need to prove their worth. And especially if you're a solopreneur or a small business owner, you have to sit there and go, okay, what value can I give for free to prove my worth to people? So people go, I like the guy's personality or the woman's personality. I like their content. It speaks to me. Then they may sign up for a program, masterclass, but that's how the process works in 2023.
100%. I mean, what the Self-Employed Business Institute, while it's a 5-month cohort, 2 months of the 5 months are devoted to what I refer to as my hug marketing system, which is presented in my book, The Self-Employed Life. But of course, in an educational program, we go a lot deeper to it. So for your listeners, you can visualize this. This was my take on a typical marketing funnel, which to be honest with you, most marketing words energetically are horrible. I mean, so I've spent my career because I approach a business, as I said.
Nobody wants to be put in the funnel. It doesn't sound comfortable.
Who wants to be put in a funnel? Who wants to be thought of as a target? Or use, people use tripwires. Like, what a horrible terminology. So most marketing words, the old fashioned marketing is just full of these horrible terms. So I really felt this funnel idea, putting people on a funnel, was really misaligned with this energetic decision people make today. So I had been looking for a way to create something different. I came up with what I call the hug marketing system. So the hug marketing system, as we teach it, is a series of concentric circles. All right. So you have an outer circle, a little smaller one, and they're like nesting eggs, right? They're a series of concentric circles. And of course, in the center is the hug. So now your goal is to build a relationship with your clients that's so deep that if you've never met in person, when you do meet in person, you would naturally give each other a hug. You probably experience this as a podcast host. I do all the time, that if I post on social media that I'm traveling somewhere, most often a listener will reach out and say, oh my gosh, you're going to be in my town. I'd love to meet you. We meet. And of course, I'm going to give them a hug. Never met them before, but there's a relationship because I really appreciate they reached out and they listened to my show. So now our goal is different, right? We're not feeding people or squeezing people through a funnel. We have a goal to build a deep relationship. Here's what I think is one of the number one problems for small businesses is that they don't have enough of the outer ring. The outer ring are what I call the lurkers. Lurkers are people that are watching and listening to what you're doing and you don't even know them by name. The reason this is the most critical thing is that today we need a very broad reach, just as you reach on your podcast and your some 1,200 plus episodes, right? You've built up a huge number of lurkers, people that are listening to you. They're forming a relationship with you without you even knowing them. When they are ready, they will step into the next level, which will become curious, and then they'll become engaged, and then they'll become connected, and then they'll become clients. So there's this journey from outer circles. The reason I say that the lack of enough lurkers is the number one problem for a business. Is a lot of solopreneurs and self-employed business owners are trying to convert customers from too small of a number in the first place. So you have to cast a broader net and then filter them down so that they know that you're right for them and they're right for you. And that's how you end up with a business with 90% ideal clients. But you have to start broadly. And that's why you use social media. That's why you use podcasting as a host and as a guest. This is why you get yourself out there, is to gain the attentions and eyes and ears of people who can become curious and engaged and connected with you to possibly become clients. But you have to start with a broad number of lurkers in the first place.
I love that hug principle because I understand all of the marketing technology as you do. And sometimes I will talk to my wife who's not in this world. And Target, what are you guys, assassins? I mean, what is going on right now? It's like, and I don't know who came up with this technology. Kajabi used to call them pipelines, which is worse than funnels, and targets, ICA, who's your ideal client avatar? And that's like speaking German to a Japanese person. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. I do my best. And in my business, we use all different terminology, and I do my very best, although these words are stuck in our heads. And again, let's remember, I'm the guy who wrote a book called Lingo, which is about the energy of words. So I pay close attention to the energy of words because, the energy of the word communicates. It's how people receive it. And I try not to use the word audience. Like, I try not to refer to my audience as a speaker, audience as a podcast host. I try to refer to people as my people. These are my people. These are and I speak to my speaking rep. It's like, I want to be these are my people that I want to get in front of. So even there, I try to, because when I think about my people, it feels much warmer, and I have a greater sense of personal responsibility for them than thinking about them as an audience. As an audience, I still feel like it's a bit of a shoot and spray. I just feel like you're casting out. But when I think about my people, I take real personal responsibility for their happiness, for their receiving value, and the relationship that we build. So I try to change every word I come across, particularly in marketing, that doesn't convey authenticity, genuine vibe. I do everything I can to change the words.
In the early days, my podcast was called the Mark STRUCZEWSKI Podcast. It was rebranded in December of 22.
Because nobody can pronounce your last name.
Yeah, and no one goes to Apple Podcasts looking how to STRUCZEWSKI something. But one of the people I had early on, really, I think in the first 100 episodes, told me to stop saying y'all. I'm from Texas, y'all. Okay. He says, do people have podcast listening parties? I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, you're talking to one person at a time. So this goes out around the world, but no one's probably sharing headphones. I'm sure they're not like the old 1950s. They're not gathering around the radio to listen to the Mr. Productivity podcast. It'd be cool if they had podcast listening parties, but that's not really a thing. So I always got to keep reminding myself that you and I are talking to one person right now, Correct. Not millions or whatever people listen to the show. It's one person at a time. And I think if we remember that, then we're going to personalize it instead of thinking of this ginormous, stadium filled audience that our voices are coming over to speakers. We're talking to one person. And I think that's really important as marketers and content creators today.
It's important to remember how people are receiving it. This was the number one piece of advice I gave to many speaker friends of mine when suddenly they became virtual speakers because of the pandemic. They would all act like they were on stage. And they would walk out on stage and say, hello, everyone. And I'm like, but they're not in a room together anymore. Like, you have to adapt to realizing that you may have hundreds of people at this virtual event, but they're by themselves in front of a laptop.
Yes.
So speak to them as individuals. 100% right, Mark. You're spot on that.
Well, you have given us so much to think about and ponder. Hopefully I added a little spice to the mix as well. And I know people are going to want to know more about you and what you're doing in the world. But before we get to that, I have a question I've been starting to ask my guests. I want you to go back to age 15. Ironically, you were selling eggs at age 14, but age 15. I just picked that age and I asked this question to all my guests. And what do you know now that you wish you could have told yourself at age 15 that maybe it would have made your trajectory a little different?
Be bold sooner. I feel, for me personally, I feel like the trajectory of my life has been slow. In fact, I continue to, obviously we all continue to grow. But when I look back, if I were to go back to the age of 15, and what I would tell that 15-year-old today is be bold quicker. Because to me, it's just, I let it take too long. I suffered with shyness well into my mid-20s. And then even as a photographer, I created a very protected business serving affluent people. As wonderful as it was very specialized. So I only had to do a select number of portrait sets a year, and more than half of them were repeat because they always came back to me. So I was relieved by the fact that I didn't need a lot of exposure back in those days. And I didn't need to meet a lot of new people. What I wish is that I got bolder quicker, because then I can imagine the impact I would have made sooner, that I'm very interested in making today. So I'm glad I did, but that would be my advice to that 15-year-old is be bolder faster.
I can certainly relate to that. I was a wallflower. I didn't want to speak in front of a room unless it was empty. And then all of a sudden I started speaking. The first time I spoke, I'll never forget this. You never forget the first time you speak. It was at the National Association of Women's in Construction here in Houston. And I was wearing a suit jacket and I was sweating profusely. I was so nervous. And after the presentation, my wife was there. She goes, I said, well, how do you think it went? Did I bomb? She goes, everyone was taking copious notes. They so enjoyed the conversation. You were a rock star up there. And I'm like, cause I've never done that before. I was scared to death, but I had the skill of communicating with people. And that's why I have the podcast and the training and stuff like that. Not everybody can do this, but I think back, I'm like, I wish I would have told myself at age 15, be bolder sooner, because I was so scared. Those oral reports in front of the room. Oh, I dreaded those things. Now I'd probably talk for 4 hours about them.
100%. Yep. Get it.
Jeffrey, where can we go to find out more about you and the dent you're putting in the universe?
Awesome. Well, you know what? I'd like to extend to your audience, especially because we talked about it, and the whole idea of brand messaging and lingo, right? Speaking people's lingo. That is so important to me that I do offer a complimentary website review where I look at people's websites and try to pick up on your brand messaging and how it can be improved. I love to do it. I love to look at businesses' websites. It's just a passion of mine. And they can go to brandmessagereview.com. Again, it's brandmessagereview.com. Fill out a really brief application, provide their URL. I look at your website. I give you a few tips on how I think you can close the gap of miscommunication, which I can tell you 98% of the time what you think you're saying is not what's coming across or reaching the audience you want. So something I love to do. And to me, it's like the beginning of like the hug marketing. It's the beginning of being able to build a relationship. Let's get to know each other. I can review your website, find out what you're doing, and give you some tips.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you being on the show, because this was a very easy conversation. I don't think you felt any stress. It was just two guys talking about life and about solopreneurship and being self-employed and winning in life. And I just think it was a great conversation. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wait. We're not done yet. Almost, but not yet. Before you leave the show, would you please do Jeffrey and me a ginormous favor? If you got value from this episode of the podcast, and I'm guessing you did if you listened all the way to the end, congrats to you. Would you please smash that share icon on whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, and share this episode with 2 or 3 of your friends that could use this information. Jeffrey and I would really appreciate it. And don't forget to head on over to my website, MrProductivity.com, MISTER, MrProductivity.com, to sign up for the free 21-day productivity challenge and find out anything else you want to know about me, including my monthly masterclass and my productive solopreneur community. It's all at MrProductivity.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, my friend, stay productive and stay positive.